Dave Talks Comics, Episode 78, Heroes Con 2015, Part 2. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons and comic book conventions. I talk about comic books I have read, cartoons I have watched, and comic book conventions that I went to. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comic books and cartoons, I will probably spoil them in some way, although that probably doesn't apply. In fact, I'm sure it doesn't apply in this case, since I'm going to be talking about Heroes Con and not specific comic books or cartoons. On this episode, I'll be talking about Day 1 of Heroes Con, about some of the people I talked to and the things I saw, people like Michel Fiffe, Andy Suriano, Robert Wilson, Adam Withers and Comfort Love, Rich Tommaso, Chris Schweizer, Joey Weiser, and Stephanie Gladden, and a couple of the panels that I went to, Bee Sting, the movie, and the Iconic Heroes panel. I'll also be talking a little bit about the meals I had, the places I ate. Okay, so Heroes Con Day 1 is over for me. It was a very full day, and it was a very fun day. I didn't plan things out as much as I have in prior years. I just kind of went with the flow as much as I could, and I think I probably missed some things on account of that, but I definitely saw some things and talked to some people and had fun today. I mentioned in my previous recording that I was going to go to this other bagel place, or to a bagel place for the second half of breakfast. I wanted to try it, so I took the train. I drove over to the train station, to the Link station, and I took the Links up, I think, 3 stations, and I got off, and I walked over to this bagel place, and the place was closed. And when I looked in the window, it looked like they were remodeling or something. I mean, there wasn't anybody in there working, but there was construction equipment in there, and obviously the place wasn't in kind of shape it needs to be in. So I just walked back to the trains to the Link station and took the Links all the way into the convention center, and there's a Einstein Bagels in the convention center, so that's where I ended up having the rest of my breakfast. So I got there earlier than I thought I would, so I just went straight into the convention center, and registration was open, so I picked up my badge, my 3-day pass, and I got a print as well because I'd bought a 3-day pass. And I got in line, and not too long after I got in line, and I was very close to I wasn't very close to the front of the line, but I wasn't as far back as I was the last time, or even probably the last couple times. I ended up talking quite a bit, although I didn't do most of the talking, to a guy who was in line behind me, who it turned out was also from the D.C. area, who works right near where I live, or within a couple of miles of where I live, although he doesn't live in that area. And while we were talking, at one point he said, do you have anything that you don't want to walk around with? And I was like, well, I don't want to walk around with this print. And he was going to take his print, and I think a couple other things he decided he didn't want to carry around back to his car. And so he stuck them in his car, and I've got his contact information, so I can get back in touch with him. But we talked a lot about comic books and other stuff, and he told me he works at the Discovery Channel, and he told me about that, and the kind of stuff he does there. And so we had a good conversation, but then when we went into the show, we kind of each went our separate ways. We said we'd see each other later on, and of course we didn't. Which is not unusual. It's not a ginormous show. It's not a huge show, but it is a big floor, and it's easy to lose somebody there. So the show opened. The show opened for people who had bought the 3-day pass at 10:30. I did lots of wandering around the showroom floor at first. First, I was very reluctant to walk up to anybody's table. I didn't want to start asking too many questions. Honestly, when you get in there early, sometimes there will be some people who are ready for you and some people who are still setting up. And I just didn't want, I don't know, I was afraid I would start spending money or something, and it's a silly worry, or that I would just be rude and say no thanks or just walk away without saying anything, which I do sometimes. But anyway, the first table that I stopped at was Michel Fiffe's table, and he is the guy behind, I think he's doing some work for Marvel now, but he has a couple of his own independent comic books that he does. One which I read recently called Copra. I've read the first 6 issues of that. I have the first collection, and he had both the first and the second collections there for sale. I decided to pass on buying the second one. I like it. I'm not as crazy about it as I am about his other series, which is called Zegas, Zegas. And there's only been 3 issues of Zegas. The first 2 I've bought in prior years. The third one, which is actually Zegas number 0, I didn't have. So I did pick that up. I think that was $10. And these are self-published books. They're limited print run. They're like, 250 issues, copies, or something like that. So it's so I think that justifies it. Now, he also had a couple other things I decided I wanted to get. He also had a print of Copra, which I really liked. Even though I wasn't crazy about the book, I really liked this print, which kind of has all these different panels arranged, and they're not all the same shape or size. Most of them are rectangular. A few of them are square. And I thought it was a really neat print. And it looks like he's only did 100 of them. And he was only asking $10 for it, which seemed very fair. Because there was plenty of people there who had prints that were like $20, $25 for something of the same size. And this is like 11 by 14 or something like that. Yeah, something like that. Which brings me to another thing, which is the fact that my book that I brought with me wasn't big enough to hold this print or some of the other stuff that I picked up today. So at first I was walking around using the program guide as my art holder because I was afraid I would get sweat. My hands are going to sweat, and I'm going to get it on these prints or on the commission that I picked up, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so I was using the program guide for the first hour or two. After talking to Michel Fiffe, and then the third thing I got from him, and I didn't pick it up immediately, but he had these little pieces of paper that, I can't remember what they call this paper, but these, heavier paper that you often get commissions on, and he had painted on them, but he hadn't painted them like one uniform color. He painted them different colors, and just kind of, I don't know. To my eye, it looks like just painting. It looks like he probably painted these bigger pieces, and then he chopped them up into smaller pieces, and then he numbered them all. There's 36 of them. And so he said, pick out one if you want a commission. Pick out one of these, and these are like 3 by 9 or something like that. 3 inches by 9 inches would be my guess. or maybe 3x6. No, well, maybe more like 3x6. And so he said, pick out one, and for $25 he would do a commission of a headshot of a character. And so I picked out the 34 to 36, and the one I'm kind of on a Samurai Jack kick. I've been on a Norse mythology kick lately, Marvel Norse mythology, and also a Samurai Jack kick lately with these commissions. And so I asked him to do Aku from Samurai Jack, and he wasn't 100% sure exactly what that looked like. He knew who Samurai Jack was, and I asked him if he needed any reference material, and he said no, he could find something, and then I walked to the next table over, and at the next table over, and I had not seen this. I don't know if he thought I was stupid or what, but I had not seen this. The next table over was Andy Suriano, who was the artist that has been drawing most of the issues of the new Samurai Jack series, which just wound up after 20 issues, and which I have been reading on my tablet, my Kindle Fire. So I felt like such an idiot when I saw that Andy Suriano was right next to Michel Fiffe. It just I didn't say anything to Michel, but so then I started talking. Well, actually, at first Andy was talking to somebody else. He had somebody who was buying one of his sketchbook. No, not a sketchbook. I don't know, design book. It was a small hardback. I considered buying it, but when I found it was $25, I decided not to. He was doing a beautiful drawing in this guy's book. He had this oversized comic book that he's done, 2 issues of it. I considered buying those, but those weren't really what I wanted. But he did have some prints, including 2 or 3. Two. He had 3 prints. 2 of them were Samurai Jack prints. One of them is also, if you've seen the cover of the 3rd volume of the IDW collections, it shows Samurai Jack pulling out his sword, and the sword is partially blocking his face, but you can see his eyes, and in the reflection on the sword you can see Aku's eyes. And I think it's a really cool print. And they were only $10. That's all he was asking for them. So I had to get one. So he had the other Samurai Jack print was of Jack the King, which is kind of like Conan the King or King Conan. If you've ever seen that episode of Samurai Jack where he gets beaten down by somebody and the guy says, not today, but one day, Jack. And then they show this picture of Jack in the future as this older man, gray hair, but as with a crown on his head. And that's kind of the character who was shown in. It wasn't the same picture from the cartoon. I think it was the cover to issue 20, the final issue of this series. So I talked to Andy Suriano. I found out one thing that I didn't know before, which is that he was one of the designers. I mean, Genndy Tartakovsky created Samurai Jack, but Andy Suriano was one of the creators of Samurai. Well, not one of the designers of the show. So he had designed a lot of the characters on the show, and I'm not sure, he might have also been involved in some of the writing. But he was definitely, and he, as I understand it, he worked on it throughout all 4 seasons of the show. So I bought that from him, and then I moved on. At that point, I decided I wanted to go pick up the commission that I had paid Robert Wilson IV to do for me, and it was a commission of Sif, and just like the commission he did for me of Ziggy Darklock last year, this commission of Sif just is awesome. I mean, well worth the money I paid for it, and just blew me away. In fact, I figured he probably had it in the book, and I started to go through the book, and I was like, no, wait, let me wait, because he was talking to somebody. Let me wait until I can get his attention, and I want to see it for the first time when he pulls it out to give it to me. And it was worth it, because it's just a beautiful print, or not print, it's a beautiful commission. And it's just from pictures I had seen of other commissions and posters and other artwork he's done that involve women. I had a feeling that this would be a good pick for him. And in the email, he said he was excited to do this. And in person, he said he reiterated that feeling that this was a character that he wanted to draw. And of course, I'll be posting pictures of all these things that I've bought. And really, there is not a dud in this group at all. There's nothing that I don't feel was worth it. Everything, all of the art that I got today, I am very, very happy with. There's nothing that I'm even in the least bit have any regrets about buying or feel that, well, it could have been better. No, they're all great. They're all great. After that, I was wandering around a little bit, just flipping through some boxes of comics, and I ran into Timothy O'Brien. Actually, he saw me, and we stopped and talked for a little while. We kind of wandered around a little bit. Then eventually, he went one way and I went another. Then I wandered around. I at this point, I had this print of Samurai Jack. I had this print of Copra. I had this commission from Robert Wilson, and all three of them were too big for the book that I had brought with me. They were all like 11 by 14, 11, they were all about 11 inches along the bottom, and the book I had was with me was to hold 9 by 12 commissions. So I wandered around for a while until I finally found a dealer that was selling art sleeves. And so I bought an art sleeve that was big enough to hold all of these pieces. I paid $5 for it, which seemed reasonable since I really needed something like this. And my only other option was to come back to the hotel, and I didn't want to do that. That probably would have taken an hour, close to an hour to do that, yeah. So I paid the $5, and I got an art sleeve, and I was very happy after that. I sat down at that point. I took some notes. I got back up. I wandered around. I talked to various people. I talked to one creator whose webcomic I want to check out, whose name is Irene Strachowski or Strachowski. I'm not sure which is correct. And she's got a webcomic, and she also did a Deathpool comic a few years ago for Marvel. Let's see. After her, I talked to there was somebody there from the Kubert School who I didn't know at first, but he explained in the process of explaining something else that he was one of Joe Kubert's grandsons, and he's also an artist, although he hadn't trained specifically for comic books, but now he's working with a novelist on a graphic novel, which is going to be the first of 3. And so we talked. I asked him about. He had some sample pages there, and so I asked him about the book, and we talked about the book and his training and the Kubert School a little bit. And so I guess I can't remember his last name, and I don't think I took. I don't know if he had a business card for that matter. I don't think he did. Yeah, I don't think I took a business card. And then the next thing I did the only other thing I did before I took a break for lunch was I stopped at the table of Adam and Comfort Love, and I talked with them for a while, mostly with Comfort, about their process. And I asked all kinds of questions, but I think basically what it boils down to, they are a married couple. They're also artists. They've been doing this for at least several years. They've been married, I think they said, for 15 years. Or maybe they've been together for 15 years. I'm not sure. Let's see, Adam and Comfort, Love, Talk, Sketch. Oh, yeah. So I was flipping through their stuff, and so I decided to get a sketch from them. I've seen them at a lot of the shows that I go to. They're from Michigan, but they are quite frequently at the Baltimore show. I think they're quite frequently at Heroes Con. I'm pretty sure they've been to Comic Geek Speak Super shows, which I go to, although there hasn't been one. It's been over 2 years now since the last one. Let's see. So I wanted a character, but I had enough Samurai Jack stuff, I felt like, at this point. I didn't want to ask them to do Aku. I couldn't think of any other characters other than Jack or Aku to ask them to do, and I didn't really want a Samurai Jack commission. And so I thought, moving over to the Norse mythology, Marvel Norse mythology side of the house, side of my brain, I decided to ask them to do a commission for me of Odin, and it's just a head sketch. If I really like it and I want something else from them, the next time I'll probably get something bigger, and which will cost me more, of course. And I think this is just a pencil sketch, is what I asked for. Yeah, I think it's just a pencil sketch. So I paid them for that. They said they had a long list, so I'm going to go back tomorrow to see if it's ready to pick it up then. Let's see. What else? I went to lunch. I had found a place using Yelp, a place called Lola's Restaurant, which was actually basically right across the street from the convention center. It's only open on weekdays, and it's only open for breakfast and lunch. So this was really my only chance to get a meal there, since I hadn't gone there for breakfast this morning. I suppose I probably should have, now that I think about it. But I didn't find it on Yelp until until I was sitting down eating the bagel that I got from Einstein Bagels. So I went there. I had their chicken and broccoli casserole, cabbage, and black-eyed peas, and some cornbread, and some sweet tea. And it was all very good and very filling. Definitely recommend the place, and definitely very likely to go back there for a Friday lunch next year at Heroes Con. So after lunch, I returned to the convention center. I made some more notes about, people I'd talked to, things I'd seen, and things I'd bought, and money I had spent. And after lunch, the first panel that I wanted to go to was the Bee Sting movie panel. Now, Bee Sting was originally a comic book. It was a one-shot comic book by Matthew Smith and, what's the artist's name? Matthew Smith's the writer, and the artist is Jeremy Massey. Yes, that's the name, Jeremy Massey, who I think before I bought Bee Sting, I believe I had bought another book that he did, that he wrote, Jeremy Massey wrote and drew himself, called The Deadbeat, which is very good, which is about a father and his estranged daughter. I think he's divorced, and he's got superpowers, and she has superpowers, and it's kind of, I don't remember all the details of it. I still have it at home, and it's a very good book, very moving, very good stuff. But this was it's kind of a horror story about a summer camp, and there wasn't a huge amount to the story. The Bee Sting is just kind of the thing that kind of sets things in motion. Or it's not really, it's not a horror story about bees, to put it that way. But the Bee Sting, it plays an important part in the story. Let's put it that way. Nobody dies because of the bee sting. And maybe I guess I am spoiling something in that way. Anyway, they did a Kickstarter. I bought this, I think, from them in 2010. And from Matt Smith in 2010 at SPX, the Small Press Expo, back close to where I live in the DTC area. And last year, or maybe it was 2013, I think it was last year. Anyway, somewhere between 2013 and 2014, they did a Kickstarter, they raised enough money, and they shot a film version of it. Now, the film version was an expanded version of the comic book. So there was, as they put it, or as Jeremy Massey wasn't there today, but as Matt Smith put it, everything that was in the comic is in the movie, but not everything that's in the movie is in the comic. So they expanded the story for the movie. And so they showed it. It's only 50 minutes long. You can get it on DVD. They were selling it there at the show. I didn't buy it, but I, of course, got to see it at the panel. It was fun. It was a good mix of horror and humor. I don't think it's going to win any Oscars, but it was a fun watch. And I don't really like horror films that much. They did answer some questions. The director was also there. Matt Smith was the writer, and there was somebody else who directed it. Some of the people who had acted in it were there. And so they answered some questions, and there wasn't anything. They said there might be another one. Probably the best anecdote they had was about there's one scene in the story where a car crashes into a tree, where the main characters are driving down the road, and I think I can't remember exactly why they crash. If the driver takes his eyes off the road, or if something jumps in front of them, or what it was, but. Anyway, they crashed into a tree. So they told the story about crashing this car and how they actually made money crashing the car into the tree, because the guy who gave them the car basically gave them, I think he only asked something like, somehow, I can't remember all the details, but somehow they spent something like $300, but then when after getting the car towed and paying to get it towed, the towing company gave them something like $400 for the wreck. So they actually made money on crashing this car. And I also went down later in the day. I stopped by Matt's table on Indy Island, which is part of Artist Alley, and I talked to him for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and he remembered me from years ago. And, we talked a little bit about the movie and how the movie was made, and he gave me, a little more insight into it, although nothing is coming to mind at the moment. So after that, let's see, I was walking around on the show floor some. Oh, I stopped at Rich Tommaso's table. Last year I bought a book from him called Dry County. It was the first in a series, and there are, at this point, 3 issues of Dry County out. I wish I could tell you exactly what it's about. Let me see. I have the issues right here. I read the first issue last year, soon after Heroes Con, and I have not read it since. And I can't remember exactly what it's about, other than I liked it. I liked the look of it. I liked the story. Let me see if there is a sales pitch on the back. There is no sales pitch on the back of the book. But his imprint is called Recoil. And let me see, what does this say? I'm trying to find, this is on the back of issue 3. I'm trying to find the culprit. I went out to Fort Myers and confronted Earl, but I didn't believe he did it. He's claimed it's this guy Cliff. Anyway, this imprint of theirs called Recoil is supposed to be crime suspense comics. So, like I said, I remembered enjoying the first issue, and unfortunately I had to wait a whole year to get issues 2 and 3. They were $5 each. These are, self-published books, but I think he does a good job. Oh, and I talked to him a little bit. He has a series coming out, and I can't remember what the name is. If I can remember, I will add it later on. But he's made a deal with Image, and he has a series coming out from Image, a new series, which is unrelated to Dry County. But I think it's another crime suspense type deal. After that, I wandered around a little more. I wound up at Chris Schweizer's table. I spent a fair amount of time there, probably a half hour. I'm not sure. Now, if you don't know Chris Schweizer, he does this great series. There have been 3 books so far called of the Crogan's series, and Crogan's is it's kind of a series of stories about characters who all come from the same family, the Crogan family. The first book, which was originally called Crogan's Vengeance, I believe, but I think it's been rebranded as something slightly different now. And the second one was Crogan's March, and the third one, so the first one is set in, I believe, the 1700s, and is a pirate story, basically. And the main character is Catfoot Crogan. That's the first book. The second book is Crogan's Loyalty, which is a French Foreign Legion story, which I think takes place in the late 1900s, or maybe it's the early 20th century. Yeah, maybe it's I can't remember exactly when it takes place. Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I think it is the 20th century. And then the third book is Crogan's Loyalty, which is set during the American Revolution. And unlike the first two, which focus on one member of the Crogan family, this one focuses on 2 brothers. And one is fighting on the side of the British, and one is fighting on the side of the colonists, the Americans. And I was impressed by all 3 of them. All 3 of them are very well done, and I love his cartooning. And they all, I thought, had very moving moments, and they are all ages books. I asked him about it, and he said he usually recommended them for ages about 9 and up, although some kids might be ready for them at 7 or 8. I asked him if there was going to be any more books in the series. He says he's been working on book 4, which is going to be set in China in the 1920s. Book 5 and 6 he has plans for. He hasn't started them, but I think he's done some concept art for them. Book 5 is going to be set in the Wild West, so he didn't mention a decade, and I didn't ask, but my guess is something like the 1880s, something like that. But it might be earlier than that, or later. I don't know. And book 6 was going to be a World War I aviation book. So hopefully we'll see those in the next 3-4 years, all 3 of them. I'm hopeful. He talked about how he had kind of screwed himself by changing the size of the paper he was working on when he began working on this 4th Crogan's book. He was talking to me, and he was talking to some other people as well. He was working on sketches at the same time as he was talking. Somebody brought him their sketchbook, and they wanted an X-Men sketch in there, and so he was working on is it John Proudstar, the American Thunderbird, and the X-Men who only lasted, I think it was 2 issues, or was it 3, something like that, before he got killed when Count Nefario's plane blew up, I believe. I think it was in X-Men 96 that he was killed, something like that. So I ended up buying. I stood there for a while. I wanted to get something. He had a huge pile of sketches he had done, pen and ink sketches he had done of various characters, both from books that he's already done, and I think some of these characters are from books that he wants to do. Those were $20 each. He also had 2 sketchbooks there. His most recent, which I've seen him post some stuff from online on Twitter, which looks great. And he had his older sketchbook, which I have not bought. I flipped through it. It looks great. There's a lot of text in there, a lot of notes about the characters, about the books as he works on them. A lot of it is about the 3 Crogan's books that are already out, so there's a lot of characters in there. And he was only asking $10 for it. And he did a drawing in the front of it. So I felt like this is an awesome deal. I had to get it, so I did. So I was there even longer because, as long as I was at his table because of that. Let's see. So I wandered around some more. I picked up the other commission that I had contacted a creator about in advance was, the creator was Joey Weiser, who does a number of, I would say, kid-friendly comic books. He did a book called Cavemen in Space that I bought from him at SPX a few years back and enjoyed very much. I got a Juggernaut sketch from him last year, I think it was, and this year I wanted a Samurai Jack themed sketch, and so I asked him to do one with Samurai Jack and Aku and to make it humorous. And I wasn't any more specific than that. And so he did a sketch, he did a commission, pencil and ink, showing with Samurai Jack and Aku as Lone Wolf and Cub, with Aku as Cub in the stroller. Now, I know a little bit about Lone Wolf and Cub, but I've never really read Lone Wolf and Cub, and honestly, I wouldn't have recognized it if I probably would not have recognized. I probably would not have recognized it if it weren't for the fact that Joey pointed it out to me what it was. And at that point, then I recognized it because there actually was a reference, a visual reference to Lone Wolf and Cub in at least one episode of Samurai Jack, and I can't remember if it was a flashback or not, but it was one basically where Jack had to look after a little kid for a period of time. And that's what, as I understand it, Lone Wolf and Cub is about. I'm not too sure if the kid is the older guy's son or not, but he's basically his surrogate son. So that. Oh, and then I also picked up the sketch that Michel Fiffe did for me of Aku, which looks very much like. I like it a lot, but I was hoping it would be stylized a little differently. It looks a little too much like what I would expect out of Andy Suriano or somebody else who. It's beautiful. I was hoping for something that was maybe stylized a little differently. No regrets. It's a great piece. I really like it. And I really like how he used negative space in this to create some of the flaming effects coming off of Aku. And the red that was already on this, because as I mentioned before, these pieces of paper you pick out a piece of paper that you wanted him to do it on. And so I made sure I picked one that was heavily red, and that the brush strokes were in mostly vertical directions. And like I said, he did a beautiful job on it. The only other panel I went to, and I guess I should also say, I didn't tape either of these panels. The one panel was a movie panel for the most part, and so there was no point in taping that. And there was really not a whole lot of back and forth, or they were prepared to answer questions, but they weren't prepared to make any statements about the movie or didn't have an oral presentation prepared for that. So the other panel that I went to, and I missed the first few minutes of it, was the Iconic Creators panel. Now let me open up the program guide because I want to make sure I get everybody's name who was on this panel. Now it was a good panel. It was very underwhelmingly attended. I think there was as many people on the panel as there was in the audience. I've seen that happen once or twice before, although I'm not sure if I've seen that happen here at Heroes Con. I was a little surprised, although there was a number of other panels going at the same time. And it is Friday of Heroes Con, which is not as well attended as Saturday, or probably even Sunday. But anyway, there was an interesting discussion. They were talking basically about, I should name the creators who were on the panel. The creators on the panel, so the panel was hosted by Tom Heinches, who I had seen before at a panel last year. And on the panel were Tim Sale, David Williams, Evan Shaner, and Wilfredo Torres, all of whom I am at least passingly familiar with. I've certainly read some of Tim Sale's stuff. I have not. I believe I've heard all of them interviewed on either Word Balloon or Word Balloon or the podcast from Atlanta that I listened to, the three guys, Swain, Dwight, and Adrian, and I'm completely blanking on the name of their podcast. It'll come to me. But I know I've heard Wilfredo Torres on there. I may have heard Tim Sale on there. I know I've heard David Williams on there. And possibly I even heard Evan Shaner, Doc Shaner on there. But Sidebar, that's the name of their podcast. So they had an interesting discussion. They were talking about iconic characters. It was called the Iconic Creators Panel. No, actually, that's not right. It was called the Iconic Heroes Panel. Okay, that makes more sense. So they were talking about working on heroes who are iconic and how some of the issues with doing that, how editorial might want you to continue to draw it the way the person drew it before and not make changes to the person's personality. And I don't know how deep they really got into it. It was still an interesting discussion. I think it's always interesting when you get a bunch of creators together, maybe when you get a bunch of creators together who don't talk to each other very often, who aren't close friends, and hear how they interact. And you had people at various levels. None of these guys, I think, are brand new to the business. I think they've all been in the business a number of years, but I think Tim Sale was by far the elder statesman of the group, older than I think the others by at least 10 years. And so it was an interesting discussion. They did ask for questions at the end. I asked a question because I had this thought going through my head because I was trying to think of something to ask. And I had this thought going through my head, well, they're talking about iconic fictional characters. What about iconic real people? Is there any way that iconic real people have affected the way that creators have made changes to iconic fictional characters? And the first response I got was, I think, I either was not very clear or David Williams misinterpreted what I had said, because he said, well, you don't want to put Barack Obama in a comic book because then that dates the comic book. And that wasn't what I was asking. I wasn't asking about putting real people into the comic book. I was talking about how real people can affect creations of fictional characters. Now, That said, it was still a very broad question, and so what I got in response was a pretty broad answer. But it was the best I could come up with. There was only one other question, I think, from the audience, so I don't feel bad for asking that question. I wish I'd had a better question. I wish maybe that I had mentioned what I had been thinking of as I was waiting for my turn to ask a question, which was, what influenced... I was thinking about Lex Luthor, and I guess this was an Iconic Heroes panel, and of course Lex Luthor is not a hero, but I was thinking about how Lex Luthor was changed in the 80s and how he was originally an evil scientist, and then he became an evil businessman. And I think that's something that John Byrne did when he took over the character after Crisis on Infinite Earths in, I think it was 86. And I wish I'd brought that example up and said, for instance, I don't know if Byrne has ever copped to the reason why he changed, whether there was somebody who he was thinking of when he made Lex Luthor into a businessman, or whether it was just something in his personality that he thought made more sense, or whatever. Now, the moderator liked my question, and he brought up an example from Will Eisner, but the response I got was very broad, which was, yes, of course, there are things from the real world that influence our fiction, these fictional characters. And that's basically the response I got. And I think what I've found is that in general, if you want a good answer, you really need to ask a specific question. And unfortunately, I didn't have a specific question to ask, and that was the best I could come up with. Okay, a few final thoughts. I stopped by Stephanie Gladden's table towards the end of the day. I think this was actually before I went to that second panel, and she did a commission for me a few years back. It may have been the first time I was at Heroes Con in 2011 of Samurai Jack, Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, and Buttercup from the Powerpuff Girls, which I really like. I still have in my book, which is across the room somewhere. And so I asked her, I told her about it, and she remembered it. I was ready for her not to remember it, and I said, well, and I mentioned, I said something, well, it says here that you've worked on The Simpsons, and she said, yeah, but I can't really draw those characters, and I was like, well, okay, and she was like, but tell me what it was that you wanted anyway, and I said, well, what I wanted was a commission of Aku from Samurai Jack and Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, and she said, okay, I'll try and do that. So I'm going to go back tomorrow. She said she needed a little bit of time, and so I said I didn't mind. There's no need to rush it, and and she wouldn't even take money in advance. So I'll go back tomorrow and see how she does with that. But kind of a supervillain team up, I guess, is what that would be. Let's see, what else? I want to get an Indie Island t-shirt tomorrow. They have a couple designs. I really like the one that Andrew McLean did. There's one by Andrew McLean and there's one by Matthew Allison. And the one by Andrew McLean I think is really cool. It's like a woman and a robot, and I'm not sure if robot is the right word, but it's a really cool design. And I think they've got it in 3 different colors. It looks like brown, or maybe that's purple, and then a navy, and then a green. And I think I want to get it in navy. I really like that, and I like it. I like it a little better than the traditional Heroes Con shirt, which is a Spider-Gwen shirt, which is there's nothing wrong with the picture. I just like this design better on the India Island shirt. So as I was saying before, it was the floor was busy, not at first, but it picked up. But it wasn't crazy busy. It was not hard to get through the aisles. It was very rare that I had to stop and wait for somebody to go through before I could walk down the aisles. All the creators that I spoke to seemed to be upbeat and seemed to be enjoying the show, and were, at least in the case of Chris Schweizer, he said that he was glad that it wasn't too busy today, gave him a chance to kind of build up to tomorrow. The one thing I didn't like was that there were some creators who had very long lines, which of course means there's no chance for me to go up and talk to them unless of course I wait in the line, which I wasn't going to do, even though I waited around a half hour for Chris Schweizer. And honestly, I learned from experience last year that may be necessary to do that, because he likes to talk to a lot of people. Last year I went up to his table to talk to him, and I kind of got interrupted, and I kind of got peeved at that, and I walked off. Although I didn't make a scene or anything, I just turned around and kind of walked off as he was talking to somebody else. The thing I wanted to say was that, where is everyone? I've seen pictures of people who were here, people like Mike Myers from Geek Brunch and Geek Brunch Retrocast, and I didn't see him anywhere on the floor. I know he was there. I've seen pictures on Facebook of him at the show, him and some other guys at the show, and his wife, and it's no big thing, I don't come to these shows to hang out with people, and there are other people. The only person I've run into that I know was Tim O'Brien. And I ran into him twice. The second time as we were both leaving the convention center at the end of the day. But it's kind of funny because it wasn't hugely crowded, but at the same time, it's a big enough place that you can spend 3 days there, and you know that other people are there because you see them posting on Facebook or you see them posting on Twitter, but you just never run into them because you're just never in the same place at the same time. And then the final thing I wanted to say is as I was leaving, after I left the Iconic Heroes panel, I was heading down on the escalator, and there was a guy who was cosplaying as the Joker coming up on the escalator, and we were passing each other, and he was kind of looking kind of worn out and kind of lagging a bit, and it would I thought about saying to him, "Why so glum?" But I decided not to. I don't know, he may not have. It was the end of the day, and maybe he was a little worn out, or I don't know. But it was the Joker look, like the Heath Ledger Joker, and I can't remember if that's a line from The Dark Knight, or I think it is from The Dark Knight. Why so glum? But anyway, I had a great time at Heroes Con today. I went to a vegan restaurant afterwards called The Vegan Bean, something like that. And I had their meatloaf, which of course is not really meat, and with mashed potatoes and gravy and coleslaw and a Corona, and there was something which kind of resembled cornbread, but not really. The best part of it was probably the meatloaf and the mashed potatoes and the beer. The coleslaw I wasn't too crazy about. Even the sauce, the gravy, I wasn't too crazy about. It was a decent meal. I don't know if I'm going to go back again. I didn't love it. Not like the meal I had at Doan's last night, or even the lunch I had today at Lola's restaurant. Lola's. It was Lola's, wasn't it? Looking at my notes right now. Lunch at Lola's, yes. Anyway, I've got to figure out where I'm going to have lunch tomorrow. I think I'm going to go to Tryon Restaurant for breakfast tomorrow morning. The breakfast downstairs is, it's okay. Tryon, I went on Sunday last year, and I'll have to figure out something to do for lunch tomorrow. I'm not sure where I'm going to go. There is a Bojangles in the convention center. Maybe I'll go there. Haven't eaten at Bojangles in, God, I don't know how long. Although we do have them up in D.C. Not a lot, but there are a few of them up in the D.C. area. But it's, it's chicken and fried chicken, and that really isn't my thing. So I'm looking forward to tomorrow. There's a ton of panels. I could very easily stay in panels for most of the afternoon tomorrow, which would probably be a good thing because the showroom floor is probably going to be very crowded, and it keeps me from spending money, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of interesting panels to go to. Although I'm thinking about skipping the super panel, the mega panel, in favor of some of the others. There's some one-on-one panels with like two creators talking that I think I'd like to go to. And of course I have some commissions to pick up from Adam and Comfort Love and from Stephanie Gladden, and I want to get a shirt. There's a print I think I want to get for my niece, and I think I would like to get a commission from that same artist. And there's sections of Artist Alley that I have not even been to yet. So I should probably spend a little bit of time wandering around there, especially early on before it gets too busy, too crazy. And honestly, if I don't buy too many more books, that's not a problem. Even though there may be some good deals to be had, I just have a ton of stuff to read at home. Don't need to be buying any more. So day one was a big success, and health-wise, I'm feeling great right now, and I'm really hoping that tomorrow will be as good or better than today was. Following up on a couple things that I spoke about earlier, the image comic that Rich Tommaso is doing is called Dark Corridor, and I believe that comes out starting in August. Recently, Chris Schweizer, who does the Crogan Adventure series, was on an episode of Indie Spinner Rack. Now, this is actually an interview from 2009, which they had not previously released because the audio isn't great. But I've listened to it, and I think it's worth a listen if you enjoy the series. And it's kind of interesting to see him look forward to what the series is going to be at a point when he had finished writing, when the first book had come out, and he was still finishing up the second book. And then finally, I wanted to apologize because I mispronounced Stephanie Gladden's name, or I believe I did, in the recording I made. I referred to her as Stephanie Gladden, and I don't know. The only thing I can think of is that I was thinking of Gladden Paints, but it's Gladden, Gladden. That's it for episode 78 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter, at DaveTalksComics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about Day 2 of Heroes Con 2015. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening. Are you ready for some football? Are you ready for some football. I am ready for some football.